last individual I'm going to talk about is Yakov Florentine, and he was a little bit different than the rest of the people because he was 30, so he was in the second generation of post-Holocaust people in Jews in Thessaloniki. And so Yaakov has a very different perspective on what Judeo-Spanish means and what the heritage of being Jewish in the city means. And so he is married to an Israeli woman, and so he speaks Hebrew and his wife speaks Greek. They both are bilingual, and they have a 1-year-old son who they've been teaching both of these languages. And so for him, Judeo-Spanish isn't even really in the equation because he doesn't speak it, his parents didn't speak it, his grandparents did, but they also, it sounds like they knew Greek. So I'm going to play you a clip from my interview with him. Sorry. Okay, so that was a little soft, so you probably couldn't hear it, but he was basically saying that he had thought about learning Spanish, but he wanted to learn Castilian Spanish, not Judeo-Spanish, and that's because he thinks Spanish is just a good language to know. There are a lot of speakers, but he said, what's the point of learning something that I can only speak with my grandmother? And so that was sort of his take on the language, even though he is very active in the Jewish community of Thessaloniki. He is one of the presidents of the youth group. He goes to Kabbalat Shabbat services regularly. He keeps kosher in his home. So he has a very strong Jewish identity, a Jewish cultural identity, and religious identity, but he doesn't have the linguistic identity. So I thought, I've sort of been struggling with the question, what does Judeo-Spanish mean for the community? Do you have to know it in order to continue to be a Jew, a Sephardic Jew? Or can you survive without the language? Or does his lack of Judeo-Spanish skills sort of show that the Jewish community is dying in Thessaloniki? So it's sort of an open question for discussion. So the last essay that I'm going to talk about it doesn't really have to do with an individual exactly. It has to do with collective memory of the Jewish community in Thessaloniki. And so collective memory is a big deal because there's a lot of folklore sort of that's passed on, a lot of folk history that's passed on from generation to generation. And there's also a lot of scholarly literature written about the history of Thessaloniki in general. And throughout the literature and these stories that people are telling, there's a definite sense of loss. And it's not surprising, given what you've heard today from these people, that there has been a lot of loss in this community, especially in recent history. And so the thing is that loss is a little more complicated than just a word. There are different ways of dealing with it. And so I took a look at 2 different institutions in the community, the Jewish Museum of Thessaloniki and the Ladino Society of the Jewish Community. And I looked at how these 2 different institutions show different ways of dealing with loss. And so the Jewish Museum of Thessaloniki is a beautiful building. I know at least one person in the room has visited. And the bottom floor is all old gravestones that were rescued from the Jewish cemetery that was destroyed during the Holocaust. And the upstairs is a history of the Jewish community in the city. And it goes from ancient history up to about the Holocaust, but it basically stops there. And so I'm going to read you a part of my essay about this. It is possible that a house of memory may pose a threat to the conception of present-day events and people. Additionally, more than a Jewish self-perception is at stake with the museum. Erica Parachia Zamor said that a large number of museum patrons are non-Jewish Greek school children visiting as a part of Thessaloniki's Holocaust Memorial Day or other cultural days. By fossilizing the Jewish history of Thessaloniki in the museum, it seems that the community sends a paradoxical message: recognize us and our influence, but only do so for the past. And so the museum sort of seeks to glorify the past history, but it comes at the cost of denying what the present community is like and denying the present population. And so I think this is I don't think this is the most constructive way of dealing with loss and dealing with the history and the deep sense of unsolved psychotherapy sort of that permeates the community. And so I think the Ladino Society, on the other hand, is sort of it's a better way of dealing with the past. And so the Ladino Society is a venue for people who are speakers of Ladino or Judeo-Spanish and would like to converse in a set place and time. And it's also a place where people can learn the language as well, younger people or older people who didn't know it. And so I'll read you a part of my essay about that. Judeo-Spanish is a tangible relic of Thessaloniki's Jewish past. It was the primary language of the Jewish people there for 400 years, allowing it to become a symbol of the quotidian Jewish life of that time. Organizing events and classes with the old language as their focus is certainly a way of looking into the past. However, Jews and non-Jews can speak the language in their daily lives, an act that brings the past into the present. Jews recognize the significance of the language. Elias Matalone, one of the Jews I met in Thessaloniki, simply said, "Ladino is my roots." This attachment gave him an emotional connection, and whether romanticized or not, the Jews are making a statement about the strength of active memory when they speak the language. So in a sense, it's sort of a subversive way of bringing the past into the present, that they can use Judeo-Spanish, which is a very old language and a language that harkens back to their history, to talk about the present and to socialize in the present and to just live in the present. And so I think the Ladino Society, it is struggling because not a lot of people speak the language anymore, and not a lot of people are that interested, as you saw from Yakov's testimony, but it is a way of bringing the past into the present. And so with that, I'll leave you a picture of the city. It is right on the Aegean, a very beautiful waterfront city. And I really enjoyed my time there and getting to meet all of these wonderful Jewish people with all these different stories. So thank you for listening.